Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. Hello, and welcome to the Autism in Black podcast. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I am the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, Inc., where we aim to include the excluded. Today, we have Nkoyo Effiong, who is the principal attorney at the Effiong Firm LLC and the creator behind That Ed Law Lady. As a former educator and parent of a child with special needs, Nkoyo helps parents advocate for their rights of their children in school. Believing that parental involvement is critical for success, Nkoyo is passionate about equipping parents with the knowledge, skills, and resources they need to become effective education advocates for their children. Specifically, Nkoyo represents families in the school discipline and special education matters. She also teaches online courses and runs a signature parent advocacy subscription program that equips special needs parents to advocate like a lawyer on behalf of their children. I'm really excited having Nkoyo on the show today to talk about what a special education attorney is, when we should hire one, and how it benefits us to have a special education attorney. Enjoy today's episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. I'm so happy she is here to bless us with all her knowledge. We have Nkoyo, who is an attorney, and she is going to tell us all about having a special education attorney and advocating in that area. Welcome.
Hi, Maria. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Excited to have you. Now, I have read your bio, but tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yes. So I am, I think at the very root of it, a concerned constituent. I am a mother. I have a bonus child who is 17 years old and on the spectrum, and I have been, along with his father, advocating for him to have not only access to a quality education, but also dignity in the way that he's treated in school since he came to live with us when he was 6 years old. So we're going on 10 years of making sure that he has every opportunity available to him in schools. So I am a mother of a child with special needs. I am a former educator, so I used to teach 4th grade in Fulton County here in Georgia, which is where I'm based. I was a general education teacher and had experience having a student in my class who actually was entitled to services, and I had no idea that she had any IEP 504 plan, any of that type of things. And so I, from being an educator, know how things can fall through the cracks. Not right, definitely not right, but you know, those are things that happen. And so day in and day out, I am just someone who really wants to make sure that every single child has access, and not just access, but the ability to maximize their potential, to meet their potential, regardless of race, class, gender, or ability.
So you were a general education teacher, and now you are a lawyer.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is. How did that happen, right?
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Right. Well, I actually, a lot of people always ask me that, but I loved teaching. That's probably one of my most treasured experiences, was being in the classroom and helping students realize their potential. I left the classroom to coach other teachers, predominantly 1st and 2nd year teachers. Mm-hmm. Largely because I just wanted to expand my impact. I was pretty successful. My students did very well academically in the time that I had, but I always just thought, like, I can only work with so many students as a teacher. So I went on to coach teachers, hoping I could, instill best practices in a large body of teachers and they could impact more and more students. And what I found is that some of the challenges that I had in my classroom, some of the issues that I saw in my school were prevalent across schools. So when I was coaching teachers, I was in 2 school districts with about 36 different schools, and it was a lot of the same stuff. So I distinctly remember working with a teacher at an elementary school in Atlanta Public Schools that is, in my opinion, walking distance from a medium security prison. And it took me literally the entire school year to realize that they were next to a prison, because I just in my own mind could not fathom that we would put a pre-K through 5 school that close to a prison. And the day that I realized it, it was literally the embodiment of the school to prison pipeline. And so I said, I'm going to law school because this can't possibly be legal. Like, there have to be laws that prevent us from setting a school this close to a prison. There have to be laws that impact a child's ability to learn and like ensure that they're in a safe and stable environment to do that. And I'm speaking of the school setting, right? We can only do so much with our families in those home settings, but surely there must be laws that prohibit the things that I've seen. And so that's how I made my foray into the law.
Wow, that is amazing. And then did you become to specialize in special education attorney due to your bonus child?
I did. So it actually was really interesting because I think it was my second year in law school. And my husband called me. My son then at that time, he would have been in 3rd grade. And so if you are an educator, know anything, ever had a child in elementary school, it's like universally across every city, state, county, whatever, they're teaching kids to multiply. Like, that is the thing that happens in 3rd grade. And they weren't teaching our son to multiply. In fact, they had told my husband, who happens to be an immigrant, that, well, he's not going to learn how to do it anyway because of his disability. So they weren't even exposing him to that. And
wow.
That is, first of all, that's a blatant, if someone ever says that to you, you ever hear anybody say something like that to you, that is like a blatant violation of the law.
Yes.
And so I was like, that doesn't sound right. And being a 4th grade teacher, I know if they don't come to me in 4th grade having mastered that skill, it's a really rough road the rest of the way forward. So I started getting a bunch of books and teaching myself a good portion of special education law, looking at the statutes, looking at the cases, et cetera, to just make sure that I could provide the type of support that I needed to for my significant other at that time, which landed me on a plane, calling a meeting, getting literally everybody from the county in a room to make changes to my son's IEP and make sure that he was actually in his least restrictive environment and being exposed to grade level curriculum.
I love it. Anybody who listens to the podcast know I am all about advocating and making sure that our children are being served as they should be. Now, for those listening, what does a special education attorney do exactly?
Yes. I love this question because I get to give my classic lawyerly response, which is, it depends. But at the core, a special education attorney can help you to ensure that schools are abiding by special education laws, whether that's under Section 504, the IDEA, the ADAA. There's a whole host of laws that are set in place to protect a child who has special needs and ensure that they have the opportunity to be in a classroom with their peers and that they're not pushed out. Because we unfortunately have a history in this country of excluding people based on race, based on ability from educational opportunities. And so we have bodies of law in place to ensure that their rights are not trampled over. So you may have attorneys, special education attorneys, who assist you if you need to file, for example, a complaint with the state, a complaint with the federal government, or a due process complaint if your child has an IEP. So there are attorneys that do specifically that. In my practice, we take a broader range and really look at how we equip parents to advocate, to help them understand the law. At times we attend IEP meetings with families to ensure that throughout the process, the things that should be happening are happening.
So special education attorneys aren't just for those children who have IEPs. You can also help with 504 plans?
Correct. So I do have some clients whose children have a 504, and the 504 is a civil rights law. So it's really there to make sure, again, that children are being protected. So you can assist there. I also help with families whose children who've not been identified yet. There are laws, specifically the child fine law, that is available under both the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and also Section 504, that essentially puts the onus on school districts to identify any child who reasonably should have access to or may need access to a specialized education.
That is so good to know, because I know personally from my own experience and with other parents as well, it is so hard to get a diagnosis and then also get that categorization in the school to have them serve our children through 504 or IEP. So it's good to know that, you can hire a lawyer to help with the process of getting that category assigned.
Absolutely. And I actually have a good portion of my caseload is in that child fine stage. Mm. And, for me, it appears often, the child may be being pushed out for some sort of school discipline related issue. And then you go back in the file and you see that there are all these indicators along the way that this child may be eligible for special education services. And so we work on both sides, whether it's school discipline. So that's, for example, if a child is being suspended long-term, anything more than 10 days, or being expelled, sent to alternative school, any number of things. Like, we also assist there, because if you do have either a 504 plan or an IEP, or if you haven't been identified yet, but may be entitled to those services, there are certain protections in place for a child as well.
Good to know. So I know for us and our family, as everybody who's listening knows, I'm a special education advocate. I'm also a therapist, so a lot of the work that I do, I also apply to my child. But this year we had a real tough time with the school, and I wanted to stay in the role of parent and not advocate. So I actually hired a special education attorney for us. But what are other reasons, and when should a parent hire a special education attorney?
Yeah. So one, I think, Maria, that is a point in time where a lot of parents make that decision, and is typically when you're trying to build relationships, leverage those relationships, and get to outcomes with the school, and you run into a lot of obstacles or hurdles. That's a lot of times when I get calls, or when we have advocacy offices here that sometimes refer attorneys, so you can potentially be on a list for that. So then people sometimes come to me because they've gone to an advocate or reached out, and people have said, you might need to file due process, or you might need to take this to the next level. So I think one of the main times when people hire a special education attorney, or maybe should consider that, is if they're thinking about filing for due process. I think it's really beneficial to make a connection with an attorney and at least get a consultation prior to filing for due process, because due process, if you have an IEP, for those of you who are familiar, I don't know how familiar your audience is with those terms, but if you feel like the IEP has been violated and you want to file a complaint, request due process to ensure that things are being done appropriately, that would be a time, I think, to engage an attorney. If you're thinking about filing a state complaint also, that may be a time to engage an attorney. If your child is being pushed out of school and they have an IEP that's related or may be associated with different behavior disorders, I think that's a good time to engage an attorney, especially if they're being recommended for what we call here a tribunal, or a hearing essentially to long-term suspend or expel. I think that's another point in time where you would want to hire an attorney. And then I think the maybe less apparent time is if you feel like you've been trying to make inroads with the district and you're not getting anywhere, it may be beneficial to hire an attorney. An attorney might tell you that this is a good time for them to step in, or might suggest that you work with an advocate.
Yes. And that's where we were in our process. Our daughter is up for her triennial assessment, and we signed the paperwork in September to have her go ahead and get her evaluations. And as of date, they still have not been done. Mm-hmm. And when I reached out, a few months back, they told me that they have 12 months, in fact, to complete any evaluations with children. And of course, anybody who's familiar with the IDEA knows that those numbers are not correct.
Not accurate.
And when I let them know that, hey, she'll be in a whole different grade, we're trying to get these evaluations done prior to her starting the third grade, because that's a testing year, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything for her. In fact, they still, again, said, no, we have 12 months. And at that point, I could no longer be in the position of advocate. I was full mama mode. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to have to get somebody to be able to have the conversations, because I can't even think, because I am so blinded with rage. So
right.
In our case, with them not abiding by the law and me not being able to have a civil conversation, it was just best for us to get somebody who could enforce the law and also be able to have professional conversations with them, because I was checked out.
Yeah, but I always tell my clients, it's better for me to be the bad guy, because, it's fine if people are like, oh, I hate her attorney. But to preserve also that relationship, because, if you think about it, your child is in school for 6 to 8 hours a day, 180 days out of the year. And unless you're removing them from school, we're looking at a period of time from K through 12th grade. So whatever you can do to preserve the relationship, and I'm not saying to fall over backwards or, be overly nice, et cetera. You want to be firm, but cordial, professional, et cetera. So whenever you're feeling like, yeah, they're about to get it, I think that's also a good time to reach out to either an advocate or an attorney for someone to sort of intercede on your behalf.
Yes. And so when parents are in these situations and now they're looking for an attorney, what should they look for in an attorney to help with their specific case?
Yeah. So one of the first things that I would say, particularly in education, is that some of the matters with how you deal with school districts are nuanced. So you definitely want to find someone who has a background either in education law or special education law. Special education law is a pretty niche area, so not every attorney will be able to assist you in that regard. So you definitely want to look for someone who has some working knowledge of how schools work and the laws that govern schools and school districts. Because again, schools and school districts, they have to abide by federal law, which is where we see the IDEA or Section 504, any other number of laws that protect a student with disability. And then they also have state laws, their local school board policies, and then things all the way down to your code of conduct. So there is a hierarchy on which law trumps, or which set of rules, body of regulations trumps the other. But you want to engage someone who understands that complexity. I think the other thing that you really want to look for when you're hiring a special education attorney is someone that you feel comfortable having difficult conversations or uncomfortable conversations with. I cannot downplay that enough. Like, you have attorney-client privilege, there's a level of confidentiality there, but that relationship really only works to the extent that you can be as openly and honest with your attorney and receive that in return. And so I think it's really important that you pick someone who you feel comfortable speaking with, especially when you're talking about your child, right? You you want someone that you can confide in, that you can ask questions with. I hear, unfortunately, a lot of times people feel uncomfortable talking with their attorney because, maybe they feel intimidated or, they don't have an equal footing for knowledge, et cetera. And I think that that's really unfortunate because we're here to serve our clients ultimately. Like the body of knowledge that I have developed over time is really for the benefit of my clients. And so it's important to me that if, I'm saying something and they don't know what I'm talking about, that they let me know, because sometimes we get stuck in our little echo chamber and we think everybody knows what an IEP is or an MDR. And especially in education, there's so many acronyms for things that you can get lost quite quickly. So I just really think it's important that you're working with someone that you feel comfortable with.
That is a great point, and lead segues right into our my next question is, what suggestions do you have for parents on how they can collaboratively work with their attorneys? Because like you said, sometimes there is that intimidation factor because you are the professional, you're the expert, and sometimes that can be intimidating.
Mm-hmm. So I would say one of the most important things is communication and understanding what you expect of your attorney and what they expect from you. So for example, whenever I engage a new client, I send an engagement letter so it's really clear what our relationship looks like. And if there are questions, like, let's talk about it. I also try to be very clear and figure out, what's your best method of communication? How do I prefer to communicate? How do we want to talk about these things? And also when you will hear from me, because I think that's the other complaint that clients often have is, I have no idea what's going on in my case. I haven't heard from my attorney in forever. Maybe I don't want to call because maybe they bill hourly. And so, there is a cost, there's an investment associated with it. But I think as much as you can on the front end, making sure that you're really clear about what those expectations are so that it's easier down the road. I think the other thing too is in special education, especially if you have an IEP, there are lots and lots of documents. So to the extent that you can keep your files organized and having a conversation even with your attorney about what's the best way to organize your special education file, I think is really beneficial. Because the other thing is you don't want to pay an attorney or their paralegal to put your file in order for you. So I think it's helpful to look at what you have and have a conversation around how do we manage this file? What things should I keep? What things shouldn't I keep? When do you want me to respond directly to the school? When will you respond? So again, I think the biggest thing is making sure that communication piece is there and then keeping track of your documents to the best of your ability.
Yes, because I know in our case, for instance, Malia's been she's had an IEP since she was 3. She's now close to 8. So her special education file is pretty thick. So having one to make sure we had everything and then giving all that information of years and years of information to the attorney so she could then look through it. We knew that, that process was going to take some time for her. So that's a great point about the time frames and, when you will reach out to someone and, how long that will take. Because if your child has been in school a while, that is a lot of information that your attorney may be looking through.
It is so true, Maria. I remember the first case that I took outside of my son was a young lady in high school. And when I requested the documents, they sent me boxes.
Oh my God.
So it can be a lengthy process. And I think, that's part of sometimes the feedback I've gotten is that's part of what's overwhelming about this as well, is it's like, here's the notice for this, and here's the draft IEP, and then here's the final IEP, and then actually we amended it. So like, here's this document, here's this evaluation from, and so I think the earlier you can get clarity on how to organize that or even share what your organizing structure has been so far, I think the better it just makes everything for everyone.
I agree. Now, when you are working on the cases, what are some of the possible outcomes or on the most common cases you work on? Or is there some outcomes that you prefer over others?
Yeah, so I will tell you that my bias is to figure out ways to resolve issues without having to file due process or file a complaint, etc. That said, if that's what we need to do to get to the resolution, that's what we'll do. But at least here in Georgia, there is a way of ensuring that whether the administrative law judge or if we end up outside in the federal court judge, any of those individuals that are ultimately making the decision have a background in special education law or even understand fully what should be happening. And that's definitely not a slight on any of those individuals. Again, it's special education law is very niche. So I don't expect judges to have a breadth of experience there. I think the other thing too that we sometimes are not always very clear with families on the front end is that litigation or filing a lawsuit or a complaint takes a long time. And so under the IDEA, if we go to due process, we have what's called stay put, in which case you remain in the last agreed upon IEP. And so if that's also not not working, or those interventions, et cetera, is not working, the child remains in that setting until we get a decision from the court. And so I can tell you, because I didn't mention it earlier, but I had a brief period of time where I was representing school districts. And so when you see it on the other side, these cases go up, we get a decision from the administrative law judge, and maybe that decision is favorable for the family. And then the district appeals. And so then we go through this process again with an appeal. And so it can take years to get a resolution. And all the while, school is still happening, right? There's a lot we're expecting children to learn in 180 days. And so it is a process for resolution, but it is a long process, and it's a stressful process, and it's an expensive process. So my goal is always to figure out how do we get to the solution we want the quickest, fastest, best way, because in my opinion, as a former educator, that's ultimately what's better for the student. There's a range of options that happen. You can file due process, and then they have a sort of mandatory resolution period that's sort of built in, because again, IDEA is really set up to ensure that the parent and the school is working together. So there's a final opportunity to try to resolve things before going to a hearing. And so things, you may go to a hearing. I also see often we've been to mediation a number of times and resolved things in mediation, even though we filed for due process, but both parties decided, let's work with a mediator and see if we can get to a resolution. And so I've had a number of cases that if we did end up filing due process, they ended up with us mediating the result and never actually going before an administrative law judge.
Wow. It didn't even occur to me that the judges, would not even have knowledge about, special education law and things like that, so that completely, was not even thinking about that. So it makes sense, that the best method or, the best outcome would be to settle it within the school district before it had to go to, those extremes, and as well as with the stay put, which I am aware of that, and thinking about how a child will have to stay in that IEP for years, especially if it was an IEP that was not great, because I'm sure you've seen some of these IEPs like I've seen, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Yes. Yes.
I've seen some, and I'm like, I don't even know how they are getting away with what they're providing on these IEPs.
I have seen that. I've seen parents paying for their own evaluations, and school districts never actually really evaluate it. It's phenomenal. And that's why we really also focus a lot on educating families. And, when I first came across you and your work, that's also something that really intrigued me, because I think it's really valuable. There's not enough resources out there for parents that give them the full spectrum of information that they need to actively and meaningfully participate in the IEP process. And so I think it's so important. It's so very important because a lot of times families aren't getting all of the information that they need, and then they're doing things or agreeing to things that allow the districts to kind of skirt around its obligation.
Yes. I tell my clients all the time, you know, a lot of times the principals have created the environment for the school, so that's what they're basing it on. They're not basing it on the law. And they rely on you as a parent not knowing the law so they can continue to do what they want to do, you know, but once you equip yourself with that knowledge, then you have a leg up.
Yeah. And I would add to that, you know, I think being a former educator myself, that there just isn't even enough training provided to teachers, administrators, et cetera, about their legal obligations.
Yes.
And that's, you know, concerning in its own regard. But I don't always even know that teachers and administrators, I guess people that are closest to the children, know whether they are or not fully abiding by the law or really what it means to do that. So, you know, that's a whole systemic issue that's concerning. I know that there are like in-services and trainings and things like that, but I just don't know if they're really to the level that they should be at.
Agreed. And I know each state is different, but in the state of Florida, you know, your background doesn't even have to be in teaching, you know, so you can go ahead and, you know, take the test and be a teacher because there is such a shortage of teachers. And, you know, that's a whole nother podcast because, you know,
yes,
there's a shortage, you know, how we don't value our teachers.
Yes.
But that's another podcast, people. But, you know, you could just go ahead and without any really formal training, go ahead and, you know, be a teacher and then have a child who has an IEP or a 504 plan in your class. And then you're like, okay, how do I do this? How do I make sure they're getting their needs met? You know, so I've seen it where some teachers are very stringent and they're thinking that the child needs to fit within everything else they're doing rather than them being flexible, you know, with the child and trying to, you know, meet those accommodations and modifications. And some just don't know what they should do. So, you know, it is a whole systemic issue that we're dealing with. And it's like peeling back the layers of an onion because it's like you get over this hurdle, then there's 20 more you have to get over. So it's just, you know, it's one reason why we are so stressed as parents and, you know, at this time, because it's like, oh my gosh, you know, these meetings take time and knowing what our children need take time as well. And but when you have a team that works together collaboratively, then that is the best thing you can have.
It really is. And I always encourage parents and guardians to keep showing up, keep talking, keep sharing what you know about your child because you're an integrity of the IEP team. You know, my son is very different at home versus at school. And part of that is because he was, you know, predominantly an only child for most of his life. So when he comes home, you know, the home environment is different from the school environment. So he would do things at school that we're like, we've never seen him do that at home. And, you know, of course, they take it like you don't believe them or whatever. But I had to constantly say, you know, these environments are different. So we need to have conversations about what happens here because there are 30, 40 different kids, you know, it's a different environment here. And so share with me what's happening here, but also listen to me when I'm telling you, like, these are his strengths. I see him every day come home and do X, Y, and Z. So I know he's capable of doing that. And I'll tell you, just as an anecdote with our son, who they didn't want to teach multiplication to when he was in 3rd grade, when we were like, he's really good with patterns and numbers, you know, so like there's no reason to assume that he's not going to be able to pick this up. And as soon as they exposed him to it, he learned all of his facts, 0 to 12, within like 6 to 8 weeks. And I mean, there are students who are in regular education who it takes them a whole school year to do that, right? So just because he's labeled as being in special education or having these special needs doesn't mean he doesn't have the capacity to do things. And I think sometimes at school, they're moving so fast that they don't stop and think like, and look and see like, what are this child's strengths? Like, what are his specific or her specific weaknesses? And I feel like that's a place where parents can provide a lot of really valuable information, but sometimes are made to feel like what they have to say isn't important. And so to everyone listening, what you have to say is immensely important. It builds out the full picture of the child. And so it's so, so important to continue showing up and sharing what you know about your child.
Yes, and I will add to that because Malia has severe anxiety, and in school, when it comes down to them watching her or evaluating her or things like that, her anxiety shows up. So I had to, have a meeting with everybody on the team to let them know, okay, yes, she has, anxiety, and this is the things that you can do to make sure that she is showing you exactly what she can do, but also making sure that her anxiety is not through the roof. Mm-hmm. Having those conversations with them, because anxiety, can, be present in our children, and they're not even realizing, what they're showing is in fact anxiety, but just talking with them, just changing your verbiage of how you're talking to my child, those things can help. So make sure you're always letting, your team know what you're seeing. And if you have a therapist or any other healthcare professional that you work with outside of the school, have them talk as well, because, all of that information helps.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to ask, so for those cases that we're trying to resolve within the district, within the school, what is the usual time frame for those?
So I've had cases where we were able to resolve it within the calendar year. I've had some where it's just going to be an ongoing process where, we make decisions every year at the beginning of the year, what we're going to be pushing for with the IEP and through the IEP meeting process to make sure that we get to where we need to be. And now those cases, I have one client that I have worked with for a couple of years, and I think it's a lot of what you had shared earlier, Maria, about you get to one area and you're like, okay, finally, we've like overcome this hurdle. We're now all on the same page. We're all collecting data so we can see what really is going on, only to find out that like there's another issue that we have to continue to go back to and advocate around. And so I think the shortest period of time, like I said, has been within a school, actually a semester, that we were able to resolve that. And then on the longer end, again, like I said, I have a client that it just with the school and the school team, it's a longer process, a longer road.
Now, with hiring attorney, we all, are very aware that, attorneys can cost a lot. Mm-hmm. So how much would a parent or caregiver be looking at to invest in hiring an attorney on average?
So that's a difficult question for me to answer because I think different attorneys do things differently. Mm-hmm. In my practice, I'm moving away from hourly billing, largely just because I think it's not super effective. And then it doesn't allow for parties to sort of anticipate what their costs will be. But I have definitely seen places where if you're planning to even file due process, that the opening retainer might be somewhere around $20,000. And that's just to get things set up, pay for experts. Some attorneys do things on contingency. So they may only take your case if they believe that they can win. And if they can win in court and be the prevailing party, then you may be entitled to attorney's fees. So like I said, it just depends where you are in the process and who you're working with, unfortunately. Not unfortunately, but just unfortunately, it's not easy to anticipate what that cost could be.
Yes, I know our attorneys here are getting away from hourly as well, and our attorney actually charges a flat fee. So for her to do the plan is a flat fee. For her to go to your IEP meeting is a flat fee as well. So, you just have to see what those fees are for that particular attorney. And are there any resources out there for parents to use to help with paying for an attorney that you know of?
So again, I don't know that there are, well, I should say this, depending on your income, there are options that are available. If you meet income threshold, you may be able to get free legal services through different legal aid societies. So I know here in Georgia, we have Atlanta Legal Aid that takes on some of these cases, and different legal aids from different communities around the state. So that's an option. Often you, again, have to be on the lower side in terms of your income to be able to access that. And then outside of that, unfortunately, I don't know of a lot of options or opportunities that are out there for families. We have a real problem in the legal profession with access to justice, and people being able to actually afford to pursue justice. And so unfortunately, we have a system right now where, to quote Brian Stevenson, you can be rich and guilty and get off, but be poor and not guilty and not have justice served.
Yes, I agree. As far as I know, the only thing that I know are legal aid, and even then, there's such a wait list. Sometimes, it doesn't work out in your favor of getting that attorney. But what are some words of wisdom you can share with our listeners who may be looking to hire an attorney or going through any kind of legal process with their attorney against the school?
I'm going to answer that. Before I answer that, Maria, I would say that, there are some attorneys who are also moving into doing things called unbundled legal services. So they may be able to help you with like a portion of your case. And so if you're trying to engage an attorney that may be, and, it seems cost prohibitive, like it may be too expensive to get an attorney, maybe you don't have a cool $20,000 sitting around to pay a retainer. You might.
And I was looking like, oh my God.
Yeah. You might see if they can help you with portions of your case, right? So for example, at my firm, we do special education strategy sessions. So we will, for a much lower fee, review your file and help you figure out what are the steps that you need to take, recognizing that not every case is ready to go to due process, and that there may be advocacy steps that you can take in between. And so that gives families the opportunity to sort of understand what's going on against the backdrop of, the legal rights that they as parents and their children have, and then figure out what those next steps are. And so we have some families where we sort of lay out a plan for them, and they are able to take action on it themselves, and they come back if maybe they get stuck again. Or others who are like, I don't want to fool with this, or, I don't want to catch a case. So, you handle it, and then we step in and do that for them. But that's the other thing that I would just add, that, I think a lot of lawyers, I don't want to say a lot of lawyers, but I think there's a movement in the law to be more modern, to be more client conscious.
Yeah.
And so those would be things that you could potentially ask an attorney if you're trying to retain someone, what options they have in addition to a flat fee, if they offer unbundled services, if they can assist you for smaller chunks of your matter.
So what are the words of wisdom you can share with our listeners?
Absolutely. So one, it's a marathon, so you have to take breaks. You have to prioritize your concerns and recognize that it's not all going to be resolved in one IEP meeting, and unfortunately, maybe not even in one school year. I think sometimes we, as parents, we're operating with all the stress that comes with raising a whole human, right? So we want to make sure that they have the absolute best, that we're controlling for the things that we can control for, that we're putting them in the best environment. And sometimes it takes time creating that. And I always tell my families, the IEP is an iterative process. Like, it's not a silver bullet. And so we may try something and it works great. We'll keep doing it. We make sure we measure and track progress to something. We may try an intervention that we thought worked that was research-based, and it doesn't work for this child in this particular circumstance. The step there then is to make sure, one, that it was implemented with fidelity, and then if it was implemented appropriately and it didn't work, to come back to the table and figure out what's the next best thing that we can try. So I would say, recognize that it's a process. Take breaks, like manage your mental health with it as well, because it can be frustrating. It can be difficult emotionally, psychologically, because again, you always want the best for your child. And I know sometimes I had nights where I'm like, we're going to send him to school, and I just don't know if the other kids are going to treat him well, or what the teachers are saying to him when I'm not there, and so it's important to make sure that you as a parent have a place where you can release some of your anxiety, frustration, etc., so that you can show up whole for your child, both as their advocate and their best advocate. But also, you're a parent, you may be a wife, employee, a business owner, or whatever. You're a lot of different things. So you just want to make sure you're giving yourself some space to be able to show up and be present in all the things that you're doing.
I love that. And it's a great point that it is a process, and it is a marathon, not a sprint, because I know even in our case, my husband had got so frustrated. He was just like, we're just going to move her school. And I was like, even in doing that, that's going to take a process as well, so we just have to be so mindful of, the decisions that we're making, and, not to do those in haste, because like you said, we want to make sure we're showing up and being the best advocate we can for our children. So what resources do you suggest for parents? Any of those that are your own, or resources that you've come across that would be great for parents?
Yep. So I like to start people with Rights Law, WRIGHTSLAW.com. I think that's it. Yeah. I think they have a wealth of information there. I will say it can be overwhelming to go on their page and just see lots of links to things. So I suggest you go there if you're like, okay, I have questions about evaluations, and try to sort of narrow your search there, because otherwise, sometimes I open up their stuff and then close it because it's a lot.
Their books are great as well. So you can, get you a book on Amazon, and, and it'll help as well. They have many, many great books.
Yeah, they have one that I really like is there, From Emotions to Advocacy. Yeah. I think regardless of what stage you are in the process, it's helpful to think about how you're separating your emotions from actually the advocacy piece of this, how to write letters, a judge maybe to read, not just thinking this email, I'm about to tell this teacher what's up, but who else might read this email, and how am I making sure that they are, that I'm building allies along the way. So I really like that book for that reason. They also have a book that's related to just sort of the special education laws in general. I like a book that's not really focused on special education in particular, but it's negotiating. And I think we don't talk enough about how IEP meetings and this whole process is like a negotiation. And so developing those skills in terms of negotiating are really beneficial. So the book that I really like for that is Getting to Yes. Every state should actually have an office or a resource related to special education. So I think that's a good place to start. I will share candidly. I think that they may have, I don't want to say that they're beholden to school districts, but I think they may be more compassionate towards school districts. So it's a place to start, but it's definitely not going to give you all of the information that you need. What other resources? I would say, knowing as much as you can of the law as possible is really helpful. I know there are websites in addition to Rights Law, like Understood and some others that are out there that have information that's available as a place to start. And again, I don't know that they always are as detailed as they need to be, but to at least get a general understanding is beneficial. And then I'm going to share one more book, so I'll make sure I get the title completely right. It is called Your Special Education Rights: What Your School District Isn't Telling You. And
Great.
You can get that on Amazon also. And it just is really great in terms of some of the behind the scenes things that are happening that you probably sense. I always have families that will say, like, I feel like they have a meeting before they meet with me. And I'm like, they do. That you're not crazy in your sentiment about that. Like, that is happening. But so that book is also really great. It's written also by attorneys who have practiced in this area for a good amount of time. So I think it's a good place to go without all the legalese. Like, it's written in terms that you can understand and follow. So I think that's another good resource.
Yes, and I do have that book and all the other ones you mentioned, and they are great resources. And we will have, these resources in the show notes.
Excellent. And then I would say the other thing too is, depending on what your child's diagnosis is or what their exceptionality is, I think whatever you can do to connect with any organizations that support that community is really important. Mm-hmm. And I'll say that because even though there are the teachers that are the special education teacher or the person from the district who's over special education, they don't always have knowledge or training in all of the potential categories that can make a child eligible for special education. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you will be, I won't even say sometimes, most of the time, you will be in the position of needing to educate them about how this particular exceptionality presents itself for your child, and then even general things about it. So to the extent that you can get as much information. So for example, if your child is on the spectrum, or if they have anxiety, or if they have, they're bipolar, or, they have dyslexia, you want to make sure that you're getting as much content knowledge about that and the supports that would be beneficial for your child, because the school and the people that are responsible for that at the school may not be as knowledgeable as you would want them to be about.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, especially when it comes to the OHI, other health impairment.
Oh, yes.
Because that could be most anything, so we could be talking about anxiety, depression, bipolar, any of those mental health diagnosis, and they are not mental health professionals, so they do not know at a basic what it is. So yes, I totally agree with that. And do you have any resources of your own that you would like to share with the audience?
Absolutely. So we have steadily been working on building a community to make sure that we're providing as much legal information, not advice. I do want to make sure, I should have probably said at the beginning to give my disclaimer that this is not a substitute for getting actual legal advice or legal representation. But we are building a community on Facebook is where we're actually starting, and it's going to go live probably later this spring. And there we'll be sharing lots of different resources, etc. But I would definitely invite anyone in your audience to follow us on social media and sign up for our online community so they can get the updates about that, and have a little freebie just around how to advocate for your child in school, just some quick things to think about and places to go for information that I'd be happy to share with your audience. And then I think connecting with people like yourself who are doing fabulous work is really important. Can't express enough how there aren't enough of us out here doing this. And if I can be really candid, there are not enough of us who are people of color, who children may be experiencing discrimination based on an intersectionality of issues. So, I didn't share earlier, but our son demonstrated all of the key characteristics, all the stereotypical signs of autism his whole life. Mm-hmm. And he was in middle school when they finally said, oh, he's not mildly intellectually delayed, and EBD, emotional behavior disorder, like oppositional defiant disorder, like this is autism. And we are now willing to recognize it as autism for a little Black boy.
Yes. So love that EBD category for.
Oh my gosh.
They love it. And I have to tell parents all the time, it's not an actual mental health diagnosis. It is something the school created as a category.
Right.
Not in the DSM. I am a therapist, and I can tell you, I know that DSM from front to back cover it is not a actual mental health diagnosis, but something the school created. And that is a whole nother podcast, because I will tell you, it's just something that really irritates me. Every time I see it, I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, it's... And when we talk about overrepresentation and underrepresentation in special education, like we will put every Black boy and girl in EBD and, you know, deny them opportunities to be under ASD or the autism spectrum disorder. And it is fascinating to me, because when I sat down and looked at all of my son's sort of alphabet soup of all the places where they said, you know, this is what he is, this is how we define him, these labels. And I looked at the description for autism. I was like, I don't understand how nobody else is seeing that this category of acronyms is the same thing as this ASD description. The difference, in my opinion, is that we look at ASD and we think, oh, this is a child that we can work with. They just have, you know, some peculiarities or like uniqueness, right? Whereas when we say someone is EBD, if we say they're oppositional defiant disorder, like it's already negative.
Yes, a behavior that they want. That's the most misdiagnosed. Is always a behavior disorder when it comes to our children.
Yeah. So.
But thank you for mentioning that. And do you want to give your text code to the audience so they can get that resource from you?
Absolutely. So you can text EDLAW, EDLAW, to 917-905-8801. And it'll take you through a series of prompts, connect you to our online village, and also get you that little guide, a little quick guide on how to advocate for your child in school.
Perfect. I know I will be texting that. And where can we find you on social media? And guys, I love her social media, especially her Instagram. So make sure you follow.
Yep. So you can find me at that EdLaw Lady, and that on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I probably am on Instagram the most. You can also follow me at the Effiong Firm, and that's at THEE, F as in Frank, F as in Frank, IONG as in Nancy, FIRM. And that is sort of the main hub, but we've recently been moving to that EdLaw Lady to really serve our education clients and our education audience more fully. So join us online there, get in the conversation. I like to jump on and do stories, have conversations. So connect with us. I'd love to be in contact with each and every one of you and help you to the best of my ability.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing all of your wonderful resources. And thank you all for listening, and we will see you on the next episode. If you haven't done so, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autismandblack.org/podcast. And be sure to share your takeaways from the show on IG Stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBPod so that we can find them and share them. And if you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, make sure to join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community. And please make sure to answer the questions to gain entry. Thank you for listening and joining me this week. Have a good one.